People say love arrives like lightning. For me, it arrived like a punch in the gut, sudden, disorienting, and far too complicated for my carefully planned life. I wasn't supposed to fall for him. Hell, I wasn't supposed to even meet him that way. But fate has a funny sense of humor, and apparently, I was the joke. It all started in the heart of Boston, where I was grinding through my third year of med school. Between sleepless nights, endless caffeine, and anatomy labs that smelled like formaldehyde, romance was the last thing on my mind. Then came Ethemy, classmate, friend, and the guy who always looked like he had more secrets than he was willing to share. One rainy afternoon, he cornered me after class with a request that would change everything. "My brother just came back from deployment," he said, avoiding my eyes. "He's not okay. Could you talk to him? Maybe help him out a little?" I almost laughed. "Ethan, I'm a med student, not a therapist." But his voice cracked when he replied, "I don't know who else to ask." That's how I found myself standing in front of a small, worn-down house on the outskirts of the city 2 days later. And that's how I met Daniel. He opened the door with a stiffness that was half military discipline, half exhaustion. He was taller than I expected, with dark hair that curled slightly at the ends and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and trusted too little. There was a faint scar running across his cheek, and when he shook my hand, it was firm but trembling ever so slightly. "So, you're the med student," he said, his voice low, almost suspicious. "Yeah," I managed, suddenly hyper-aware of my own awkwardness. "Your brother asked me to check in on you." His lips twitched, not quite a smile. Figures. Inside, his place was military neat but cold, like he was afraid to let himself settle back into civilian life. We talked. At first, it was surface level. His routines, the nightmares that kept him awake, the dull ache in his shoulder from an old injury. But then, as the hours stretched, his words peeled back layers I wasn't prepared for. He wasn't just battling insomnia. He was battling himself, the memories, the silence, the crushing weight of trying to be the strong soldier everyone expected. And for reasons I couldn't explain, I didn't just listen. I felt it, like his pain was reaching inside my chest and twisting. "You ever feel like you're alive, but not really living?" he asked that first night, his gaze fixed on the window. I swallowed hard. Every day in med school, that made him laugh, a rough, broken sound that still somehow lit up the room. And just like that, something shifted between us. The following weeks blurred into a strange rhythm. I'd swing by after classes, sometimes with takeout, sometimes just with my notes and the excuse of needing a quiet place to study. Daniel never said I was intruding, and I never admitted how much I wanted to be there. One evening, I found him sitting on the porch, staring at the fading light. He looked so lost that my chest tightened. Without thinking, I sat beside him, close enough that our knees brushed. He didn't move away. "You don't have to keep this all inside, you know," I murmured. His jaw clenched. "And what if I do? What if talking just makes it worse? Then let me be the one who listens anyway." He turned his head then, and for a long, breathless moment, his eyes locked onto mine. There was no mistaking the longing, the fear, the fire. And yet, he pulled back, retreating behind the walls he'd built so carefully. But walls can only hold so much before they crack. The night it happened, the city was buzzing with 4th of July fireworks. Ethan had invited me to join their family barbecue, but I ended up staying behind with Daniel. The explosions in the sky rattled him, the sound too close to the ones he'd left behind overseas. His hands shook as he pressed them over his ears, his body trembling. I didn't think. I just pulled him into my arms. "Hey, it's okay. You're here. You're safe." He stiffened at first, then collapsed against me, burying his face in my shoulder. The heat of him, the raw vulnerability, it was overwhelming. I held on tighter, whispering whatever words came to me, until the fireworks faded and the only sound was his ragged breathing. When he finally lifted his head, his eyes glistened with something that wasn't just pain. It was need. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For what?" And then, before I could blink, his lips brushed mine, tentative, broken, desperate. I froze. Not because I didn't want it, but because I wanted it too much. He pulled back instantly, shame flooding his face. Forget it. I shouldn't have. I cut him off, pressing my forehead to his. Daniel, don't. And then I kissed him back. It wasn't perfect. It was messy, trembling, full of all the things we couldn't say out loud. But in that moment it was real. More real than anything I'd ever known. The days after were complicated. He tried to push me away, insisting he wasn't good for me, that his world was too dark, too heavy. But every time he withdrew, I pulled him back, not with arguments but with quiet persistence, showing up, holding space, refusing to let him drown in silence. Slowly, he began to let me in. And slowly, I began to realize that this wasn't just about helping Ethan's brother. It was about finding something I hadn't even known I was missing. Daniel didn't make things easy. Love never is, especially when it blooms in the cracks of old wounds. Some nights, he'd vanish into himself, staring at the ceiling with his fists clenched, too afraid to sleep. Other days, he'd snap at me over nothing, how I stacked the dishes, how I left my shoes by the door, only to apologize later with eyes so broken I couldn't hold the grudge. But I wasn't going anywhere. One evening, after a particularly rough day, I found him sitting on the kitchen floor with his back against the counter, a half-empty glass of whiskey in his hand. "You shouldn't be here," he muttered, not looking at me. "And yet I am." I slid down beside him, shoulder to shoulder. "So maybe I'm exactly where I should be." He let out a hollow laugh. "You're young. You've got your whole life ahead of you. Med school, a career, maybe someone who's not this." He gestured vaguely to himself, as if he were nothing more than damaged goods. I turned, forcing him to meet my gaze. "Daniel, you're not broken. You're human. And I don't want someone else. I want you." For a long moment, silence filled the space between us, heavy and raw. Then his hand found mine, hesitant, trembling, but real. And in that fragile touch, I felt something stronger than all his doubts: trust. We began to build something resembling a life together. It wasn't conventional, it wasn't simple, but it was ours. Mornings with coffee on the porch, evenings where I studied while he read beside me, quiet moments that stitched themselves into something like hope. Yet, the world outside wasn't always kind. Ethan found out before we told him. I'll never forget the way he stormed into Daniel's house one night, his face pale with anger. "You?" he spat, glaring at me. "Of all people, you?" I opened my mouth to explain, but Daniel stood first. "Stop," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It's not his fault. It's not anyone's fault. It just happened." Ethan shook his head, betrayal sharp in his eyes. "You were supposed to help him. Not," he cut himself off, turning away. "I can't deal with this." He left that night, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. Daniel stood frozen, his fists clenched, as if expecting me to follow Ethan and not him. But I didn't move. I walked to him, wrapped my arms around him, and whispered, "We'll figure this out. Because love isn't just the sweet moments, it's standing in the storm together, daring it to break you." Weeks passed. Ethan avoided me, barely looked at me in class. Daniel carried the guilt like an extra weight on his shoulders, as though his happiness had come at the cost of his brother's trust. I tried to remind him that love wasn't theft, that what we had didn't diminish his bond with Ethan. But convincing him was another battle altogether. The turning point came unexpectedly. Daniel's nightmares hit harder one night, dragging him awake in a cold sweat, his chest heaving as if he were still on the battlefield. I held him, whispering, grounding him until his breathing slowed. In the stillness that followed, he whispered something I'd never heard from him before. "I don't deserve you." I pulled back just enough to see his face. "Then let me decide what I deserve." Tears slipped down his cheeks, silent and unguarded. And in that moment, he let himself be vulnerable in a way that went beyond words. The next day he called Ethan, not to defend us, not to beg, but to be honest. I waited outside, pacing the porch, listening to the muffled rumble of his voice. When he finally stepped out, there was no clear resolution written on his face, just exhaustion, and maybe a flicker of relief. He's angry, Daniel admitted. But he's listening. That's more than I expected. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. But it was a beginning. Time has a way of softening edges. Slowly, Ethan came around. He saw that I hadn't taken his brother away, I'd helped bring him back. One evening, months later, he even joined us for dinner. The tension was still there, but so was something else, possibility. And Daniel? He began to heal piece by piece. Not because I fixed him, I couldn't, but because he let himself be loved. And in that love, found reasons to keep moving forward. The first time he laughed, really laughed. Loud and unrestrained, it startled me. We were cooking together, he'd burned the chicken, and I teased him mercilessly. He threw a towel at me, and then suddenly, the kitchen was filled with a sound so pure it made my chest ache. That laugh was worth every sleepless night, every argument, every scar. Months turned into a year. My rotations grew harder, my hours longer, but every time I came home to Daniel waiting for Mazama times with dinner, sometimes with silence, sometimes with nothing but an embrace, I knew I had found something rare, something worth holding on to. One chilly autumn evening, as we walked through Boston Common, leaves crunching beneath our feet, Daniel suddenly stopped. I used to think I'd never have this, he said quietly. A life, a future, someone who sees me, not just the uniform, not just the scars. I reached for his hand, threading my fingers through his. You do now. He smiled then, small but unshakable, and in that moment, the world seemed to pause around us. Love hadn't arrived like lightning. It had come like a storm, violent, chaotic, terrifying. But when the skies cleared, what remained was something stronger than fear. And standing there, hand in hand with Daniel, I realized something simple yet profound. Sometimes the people we're meant to heal end up healing us too. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.